bass fishing, and how to make a bass rod out of a Zebco fishing reel and an extending steel radio antenna. How about that for a show, Aaron?
That's some bass, as they might say on the old Saturday Night Live. Yeah, tell us who we talked to. This is an interesting fellow.
Yeah, I mean, today we talked to Steve Bowman, an old friend of mine, but a lot of folks, if they're at all into watching fishing on television, they have seen him as part of the Bassmaster series for years and years. He runs all of their tournament coverage for Bassmaster.com. He works with all the anglers and keeps them on board and works all that out. I mean, if they're fishing with bass, he's the one dealing with them. And I know Steve from his days as a writer with the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. He wrote probably the best modern waterfowl book, the Arkansas Duck Hunter's Almanac, that is just it's an iconic book in this part of the world on the Mississippi Flyway. So Steve's just a cool guy to talk to, and he has more great stories, but his passion for getting kids involved because of his own childhood is what really kind of anchors any talk with Steve.
Yeah, that part was really, that just caught me, and it was a really awesome story, and just kind of a reminder too to folks, especially for us, we get caught up in this like professional conservation life, right, where there's all these things you have to do and there's steps to it, but you forget sometimes that nobody's in conservation if they don't get introduced to it somehow.
That's right.
That's a key thing he brought, and I was really appreciative of that.
Yeah, we need people. We need people.
Yep, and we need the ones who care and are passionate about it, and that starts with having that cool opportunity first, and that's what he really helped do that in many different places. It's clear, and he's a good storyteller. A lot of these guys you bring on, Bill, I'm like, man, I want to sit around the fire with this guy. That's where the good stuff comes. It's hard to fit it all in this 1 hour format that we do, and we get a lot of good stuff, but I know there's so much more.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We could do 3 hours and it would just keep growing.
Well, enjoy this one, folks. Steve Bowman. What is it? Bass is the organization. Every time I say that, I'm like, is that really what it's called? That's the name. Yeah, from Bass, who runs all the bass tournaments. Enjoy.
Since 1936, the National Wildlife Federation has worked with hunters and anglers to pass the most important conservation laws in American history and to protect our sporting traditions. This podcast explores our history, our values, and the work we do to safeguard the fish and wildlife that fuel our passions. We are NWF Outdoors.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NWF Outdoors podcast. I'm Bill Cooksey here with host Aaron Kendall. What's going on, Aaron?
Oh, another day in paradise, buddy.
Absolutely. Hey, today, if you're a bass fisherman or a duck hunter, or really anybody in the outdoors, but especially a bass fisherman, you're going to want to listen to this show. The guy we have on, I've known him for I think I first met him about 30 years ago when he was hanging out at WMA's writing about duck hunting for the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. But since then, he has been in the Arkansas Outdoors Hall of Fame, the Waterfowl Hall of Fame, the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame. He's the manager of Bassmaster.com tournament coverage, the manager of angler relations for bass. Again, he's been the outdoor editor of the Democrat-Gazette. He wrote the Arkansas Duck Hunter's Almanac. And he's also a sheriff's deputy, and most of all, he's Barbara's husband. So, Steve Bowman, welcome to the show.
Man, I appreciate you guys letting me come out and hang out for a little bit. So, it's always good to hook back up with you, Bill. And it has been 30 or 40 years at least. So,
we're a little grayer, a little bit grayer.
A lot grayer, a lot faster.
Well, we always start off the show talking about what we've been doing outdoors. So let's start with you. What have you done outdoors lately?
Well, I just got back from Lake Fort, Texas. We had our Bassmaster Elite there where Lee Livesey just kind of coasted to another blue trophy in one of the more amazing fisheries in the country. And prior to that, I mean, I was spending every day I could sitting against a tree and throwing out a little bit of yelping and hoping to call in a a long beard every once in a while. So, but
I hope you had at least a little bit of luck.
I did. I mean, I love the turkey hunting. Right now, my turkey season's over, and you know, I do all kinds of things in the outdoors. But when it gets to this point, and I tell everybody that'll listen, I'm just wasting time until next turkey season. I mean, that's all I'm doing right now, wasting time trying to make it go away until the next turkey season. Because really, that's what I love to do, and I love. I've hunted most of the states in the country, not all of them, but a lot of them, and just love. I mean, I could do that. I wish I could do it every day. So, but
I'm hip. Well, speaking of turkeys, Aaron, how about you?
Well, yeah, we're going to take this time. Steve, you should know too. I spent a lot of time talking about my kid. I'm proud of him. He's such an aspiring, awesome young hunter, and we'll talk about him again. He got his first turkey last week. Went out without me. One of the first times he ever went without me, and he got it with the buddy. But close to home here, about 10 minutes from the house, which is really cool. About 9,000 feet. He found him a tom, and we worked on it together. Had a little setback when the dog got a hold of the fan, and that involved basically we have a ping pong table in the garage, and we had the fan up there with some salt on it, trying to dry it out a little, And my daughter says, "Well, I want to play ping pong." Well, we haven't played ping pong in a while, so I was like, "Okay." We clean out the ping pong table, set it down on the cooler next to the ping pong table, thinking, "Well, as soon as we get done, we'll put it right back." Well, we never even ended up playing ping pong because we got distracted on something else. Forgot about it. Came home and heard my boy out there hollering, and it was because the dog had taken the whole thing apart. But we reconstructed it and got something serviceable and a good memory. So anyway, that happened. My other thing outside is, we've been doing a little bit of shed hunting. It's that time of year we like going out and wandering new country. There's a unit we're looking at this year for some elk that we just decided, hey, we'll go wander around and see if we can find some sheds while we're at it. And got Steve's ringer on or something there.
That's right.
But found a really cool shed this week with about a 25-inch drop time, which was really interesting. So I'll have to show you some pictures, or maybe we'll put a picture with the
wow,
with the podcast email here. But just getting out in the woods as much as I can, and we had 17 inches of snow over the last 4 days here at my house too. So we needed it. It was dry as a bone, and now we have some moisture. So all things are looking up.
wow.
I'm thinking a 25-inch drop time. That's like a big main beam on any of the cervids in our part of the world. So.
Yeah. It's pretty incredible. It's a cool shed.
Wow, that's awesome.
Well, let's see. Last week I was in Mississippi doing some work and stayed at a remote hunting camp, and this was kind of cool. 3 Hall of Fame quarterbacks from Louisiana. It's where they duck hunt all year. So when you go around the lodge and see Peyton, Eli, and Archie in photos with their kids and all holding ducks, that was pretty cool. But best of all, my wife and I got to spend this past weekend fishing on Kentucky Lake, and we actually caught bass. So that's always fun. Even missed a little bit of Bassmaster on the tube on Sunday morning because the fish kept biting on up into the morning pretty good. So, yeah, it's been good. And obviously always enjoy the chance to get out on the lake. Let's get this story started because Steve has a good story, and it starts at the beginning. I mean, one of his best stories really comes out of his childhood, and it's his antenna fishing rod story is what I think of it as. So, Steve, let's start about, with you growing up, because it wasn't, it's not like you had dad, holding your hand and taking you out hunting and fishing
Right.
from the start.
Well, I mean, and I didn't. I had an absentee dad, and we all have dads, and some of them play bigger roles than others, but mine didn't play much of any role. But I grew up in town. Now it was kind of, it was Little Rock. I was close to the edge of town, so I could actually walk to hunt and walk to fish. But we had a little old pond there close to the house that the neighbor boys, we would jump the fence and everything. And I was, back then we're talking, you know, 70, 71, 72, right in there. And I wanted a fishing rod rather than a stick and a string. And so I was able to, back then, a lot of folks don't remember, Aaron's probably too young to remember, but we had telescoping antennas on the cars. I mean, you just pull it up, pull it down, whatever. It's just like on a transistor
Right.
radio.
I remember. I'm glad that you're saying that I'm not that old.
Oh,
Then. So
well, I
we're
mean,
starting
my
off
eyesight's
good.
bad too, so. But I there was an '04 Falcon. I got an antenna off of it, and it was long, and it wasn't. It was probably 5.5 feet long, but I converted that into a fishing rod and pull caps from beer cans and uh, a neighbor's father's soldering iron and soldered those on there for the eyes. And then I got me I mowed grass and everything. We didn't have any money. I couldn't ask anybody for anything, but I saved up a whole summer, just a little money on the side because pretty much when we mowed grass, that wasn't my money. That was the family's money, and but I got to keep 25, 50 cents, whatever, and eventually saved up about $9, $10. I think it was $9.89, the zip code 33 at the Sterling store. And I bought me one. And I duct taped and electrical taped that thing to that antenna, and that was my fishing rod. And I thought it was the finest fishing rod in the world. I mean, he couldn't have convinced me any different, and but the whole thing revolved around that little pond near the house where I could get away and be a boy, do the things that young boys need to do to grow into men that have a little bit of wildness at heart and a little adventure in them and that kind of thing. And so that pond there was my opportunity. And then after that, my mother really instilled in me when you have, you make the best of your opportunity. Nobody's going to do this for you. You do it, So that's where the rod came in. And so that was really a driving force in my life as a young boy. Years later, I went to, I went to work for the Arkansas Democrat as a layout and design artist of all things. I won some awards in college and that kind of thing. I hunted and fished all the time, and I went to work at the newspaper, and I would, my shift didn't start till noon or 4. Then I'd work till midnight or, 2 or 3 in the morning to get the newspaper out. And so I would show up. I'd been hunting and fishing that morning. I had blood on my hands and fish smelling like fish, whatever. And I got the opportunity to be the outdoor writer. And they actually said, we want you to do this. We're getting rid of the guy that was doing it. We want you to do it until we find somebody new, And so I did that for many years. And actually I had that chip on my shoulder as a young, that was built when I was a kid that, I didn't have a dad to take me fishing. I didn't have a dad to take me. I learned it all myself, or through reading, or through just listening to others and making the most of whatever opportunities I crossed. And I did something for Governor Mike Huckabee, and I racked my brain trying to remember what it was. It wasn't anything, like I didn't go kill anybody or anything, but it was just simple.
That's a big favor.
And he made the mistake of saying, well, what can I do for you? And I said, I'm going to show you. So I got in his black Suburban with his state troopers, and we drove to basically an area downtown Little Rock. And I showed him a creek, and I said, this creek right here, if it had a weir right there, it'd back up water, and we'd have a 2 or 3 acre pond here that kids could fish in, And Huckabee was a big fisherman. He understood immediately And he used his discretionary emergency funds, whatever, and 3, 4, 5 months later, we had a pond at one of the busiest intersections in Little Rock, and that was important to me. But what happened with that, we were doing a dedication to this pond, and we had all the newspaper reporters and television cameras and a bunch of folks, and there was a picnic table full of cheese and toothpicks and fruit and all that. A bunch of white folks standing around looking important with cameras, right? And I look over to the side, and there's this little African American boy, about 9 or 10 years old. His name was Tyrone. I didn't know that at the time. But he's standing over there, just kind of peeking around the corner, just looking. I'm always drawn to that kid because I was that kid, right? So I walked over to him and I knelt down and I said, how you doing? What you doing? He goes, well, what are y'all doing? And I said, well, we're dedicating this fishing pond so people can go fish here. He goes, well, who can fish here? And I was like, you can fish here. This is your pond. That was it. The kid turned on his heels and ran away from me as fast as he could. Now, near this intersection is the Little Rock Zoo, and they had grown a buffer of bamboo around it. Was a noise buffer and a sight buffer for the animals on the other side. I didn't know, and I hadn't even really ever thought about it at the time. 20 minutes later, sitting up there messing around with all these muckety mucks, and I look over on that weir, and there's Tyrone. He had run straight from me to the zoo and rode down. It was 20, 25-foot piece of bamboo. And I don't know how he got it off at the bottom, but he broke it off at the bottom, and it still had green leaves on it. And he's standing on the weir. He had taken his shoelaces out of his high tops. And we had these little hook packages and bobber packages and stuff there. And he had somehow or another, I still wish I'd have taken pictures of how he had put his hook on his shoestrings from his high tops. And he was fishing. He was fishing. Now, what the part of that story that you don't understand being from Tennessee and Aaron's from up there in the mountains is at that very time, HBO was filming a documentary 3 blocks from there called Banging in the Rock. There were kids dying every night. The gang lifestyle was terrible in the 90s for Little Rock, and so much so that it was on HBO, but it was prevalent all over the country. So here's a kid that's right on the verge of either going into a gang or going fishing. And he's taking the opportunity to go fishing. And so everything just, God has a way of making things clear and clear as you go. But he put it in my head right then that opportunity is something we don't focus enough on. We'll focus on, a better boat ramp, 100 miles from any African-American young child or any poor white boy who didn't have a father or whatever. But what are we doing to create opportunities for the truly less fortunate, the fortunate, and it's not like they're just desolate, but they're just not close to it. And so that was always important. And even now, I drive around in other cities and I said, man, I try to tell the leaders, if y'all would do this, if you want to save hunting and fishing, you got to figure out how to get it on 3rd and Main. You got to figure out how that,
Amen.
And because that's where we're losing right there. That's where we've lost for the last 30, 40 years is we don't give these kids who would love to go to the extent of using a car antenna or a bamboo rod that they wrote down and to just go fishing. I sit on that bank and I learned about the environment. I understood at some point in time that, hey, these fish really get active about, May, start bedding. And then I started, I see how when the worms were under the logs and under the leaves and the bugs and this and that. I mean, you start learning so much because you get into it. And we've sanitized so many things, and then we pushed the important things that are important to all of us so far away that you've got to be pretty fortunate to get to them. I mean, Lake Fork is not a place where there's not in a Lake Fork elementary school, I don't think. I mean, Kentucky Lake has communities around it, but it doesn't have, an opportunity for a great, multitude of kids to go sit on the bank. We all started sitting on the bank,
Right.
And so that's always been very important to me is one, we impart the knowledge of how to catch, kill, capture, trap, whatever, the reasons for that, the beauty of that, and try to figure out how we can get more of these elements into mainstream or into elementary mainstream or whatever. Because I'm telling you, man, you can go. One of my best friends in this business is David Healey. He and I started the college bass fishing thing in 2003, and he grew up in Manhattan. And he has a similar story to mine, except he had Central Park, a bike ride away. And riding through the Manhattan, holding this rod and reel and his tackle box on his handlebar. There's millions of us out there that want to do this, but we don't live where we have to worry about ticks and chiggers. We have to worry about bigger and worse things, and that's where we grow up. But I'm just saying, we've diverted our focus. I want to keep things pristine, well away from the towns and the cities and everything. Those are places that we all strive to. But let's don't forget about some of the foundational things. And the foundational things begin with just as simple as an opportunity.
Is that, Steve? Is that kind of where some of the high school and collegiate fishing comes from, or the idea when y'all were starting that?
Well, the college thing. At the time, the college thing, and Healey was very. His whole deal was, he thinks things critically, and he's like, I read a study where even kids that fish from, at a young age, if sometime in, the time they're 16 to 21, we lose them, and then we regain maybe 15%. And I was like, dang, that's pretty profound. What do we got? So we started talking about college. The first year we put together the college bass fishing thing, we could find 6 college teams to do that. Now there's thousands. There's hundreds of kids that are going to school in your state and other states on a scholarship to fish. Now, so the progression of that was, okay, well, maybe there's something in high school and then junior high. That we never envisioned that. I'll be 100%. Never even thought that would be the deal. But the ripple, that just goes to show you what the ripple effect is. It's creating an opportunity. When I was in college, I didn't know what bass fishing was. I'd take my little antenna, and somebody gave me a big end. It wasn't a big O, it was a big end again. And I thought, you throw it out there and let it sit. Looks like a fish. Something's going to swim up there and eat it. Never did, right? And it scared me to death to hit a rock or a brush pile with it because it might get hung up. Well, it's made not to, but I didn't know that. And, so we don't know how, like I said, in college, I didn't know any of this. My introduction to bass fishing was through Ricky Green, which most people's like, Ricky who? Well, Ricky Green was the man. in the early 80s
Yeah, it was.
and late 70s, early 80s. He was the man, and he was from the same hometown as my college. So I got to see some of that and get interested. And then he took me under my wing a few years later, or under his wing, when I went to the newspaper and just became an incredible mentor of knowledge. And we need more of that, but we need a lot of it is just the introduction of an opportunity. Uh, I pray that Tyrone is still fishing today. But you know what?
Yeah.
The odds are that Tyrone is already dead by someone else's hand, right? I mean, that's what the odds are. I mean, that's the reality of the situation in that world. But I hope that he's not. I hope that he's fishing. I hope he's got kids. He would have kids now, and he's teaching them to fish. But I really got more in tune with all this during the pandemic. I have my fifth grandbaby this week. I got 4 grandkids that are old enough to go fishing with me. 2 of them are 3 of them are adopted, and 2 of them are African Americans. And you just stop and think. People. Take the people out of the equation, and you're sitting wherever you are in town. And like, where am I going to take my grandson fishing? Where he can have a realistic opportunity to catch a fish, be safe, and get introduced to all this stuff. And we stop building those places. We stop managing those places. We stop paying attention to those places. Those are the places that are full of junk and really polluted or whatever, if they're within a city or where the bad guys dump cars,
Right.
So, and like I said, I told you that don't get me started on some of this stuff. I'll go forever. I get passionate about it. I really do.
But you're right. I mean, opportunity is everything, and let's face it, hunting and fishing, if you don't have someone bringing you to it, is not an easy nut to crack. It's intimidating. It's and especially if maybe you don't look like the other people at the lake. I can imagine that's a barrier as well. So, all of that's important if we want to keep this thing going.
Right.
But now I've got to ask you about your career. It just dawned on me. You talked about, since you didn't have anyone really guiding you along in hunting and fishing growing up, and you did a lot through reading, that sort of thing. Is that maybe what led you to the journalism career? No,
I'll be honest with you. I love to hunt and fish, and I had some mentors in my church that I'd all. I mean, I wasn't any different then than I am now. I mean, 75% of my thought process was about fish or deer or ducks or squirrels. I mean, dude, I'm just going to tell you, I've killed more squirrels than 99 point whatever percent of this world with a slingshot. I mean, that's just what I did, right? My sisters never could understand why all their jacks would come up missing, because I'm going to tell you, back then they made those lead jacks, and they were hard, and you could shoot one of them through a 1/2-inch plywood. And anyway, that's other stories. But I wanted to do that. I wanted to figure. People say, "Well, what do you want to do for a living?" So I want to hunt and fish for a living. I mean, now you could say that, and people say, "Hey, there's people that are doing it." Back then, nobody does that. So I was always looking. I just knew that I wanted to hunt and fish, and I wanted to make some money so I could go to the places and hunt and fish. I had a couple of things. I was going to be a wildlife biologist, and I was too dumb for that. And so the next best thing was communications, and I became the sports editor for the yearbook and made sure that hunting and fishing was part of that, and got some things going, and then had an opportunity. But when I went to work at the Democrat, I told my boss, I said, "Hey, I'll do anything you want me to do. Just don't ever ask me to write."
Wait, do what?
I did. I was not hired to write. I had to teach myself to write, and it was a hard process. And I'm not sure that even today that I'm all that great of a writer. But I've written a lot of things. But I know when I get passionate that I can relay a story. And everything that we do, everything that you do, Bill, and everything that you do, Aaron, everything that a salesman does, and it doesn't matter if you're the president or the postman, the successful guys learn how to tell a story. They are telling a story all the time. Storytelling is, it started in a cave, painted on a wall, but now it's gotten a little bit more refined. And social media is all about telling a story.
I want to ask you then, Steve, because what about a defining story that was, maybe changed the trajectory of your life, the projection of your life, because, sometimes you get that right opportunity, you're talking to the right person, and you can tell a compelling story, and then you're off to the races in a different direction. Do you have something like that?
Yeah, I think early in my career, there was that kind of got me started. There was some things going on here in Arkansas. Back then, we had a 30-day duck season. If you know anything about Arkansas, you know that it has got the best public land hunting system for waterfowl in the world, period. But there's also
Bill tells me so. Yes. I don't know, but Bill tells me so.
Yeah, the best private land duck hunting in the world, period. And I've hunted virtually every duck hunted virtually every state. Scouting for turkeys, not. But and the people that own those private lakes or private areas, they're the most influential people. They're very rich and very influential. Well, I hunted by Amita. I was lucky enough when I was 12 years old, 13 years old, and an old man down the street. Won't you just come with me? And I would, I just loved the place. Been lost in it more than anybody, but know it better than anybody. Not anybody, but most folks. And they would set these duck seasons, early November, and by mid to late December, there would be no duck season for, because, it'd be over, right? They'd pack it all on the front side. And I'm like, man, by Amita and these places that I can go to now and White River and stuff, they're not even getting flooded until later in the season, and having gone to college in South Arkansas, I realized that Felsenthal didn't get flooded until December. So half the state didn't have an opportunity to duck hunt unless you were rich. And I wrote those things, and I led a charge with a lot of people to rethink the duck seasons and the structures in Arkansas to where they wouldn't be so front heavy. We'd spread them out to where the public land guy that, was going to drive from Little Rock that morning, doesn't have a cabin, going to walk out in the woods, kill him a few ducks. And really that kind of solidified my popularity, I guess, if that may be too strong a word, but it gave me a readership. And and so the duck season dates, and then a couple things that they wanted to channelize the White River for, barge traffic.
I remember.
And, and I understand by that time I had understood what Rex Hancock had done for Cache River. I understood how the channelization of the Arkansas River had affected negatively a Central Flyway duck in Arkansas, but I could see where that was necessary. Could not see where the White River deal was necessary, so I came out against that and really got a lot of support and kind of those are a couple of the things. I was able to. With the help of some other folks. There's nothing that I did on my own. But sometimes I was the quiet cheerleader behind there, and sometimes I was the ramrod in front. But when we created the 3-point rule for Arkansas, which is today is 98% accepted and loved by deer hunters in Arkansas. And basically what we did, and we knew we would do in some regard, is we had 375,000 deer hunters in the state. And we knew that when that regulation came into place that we were going to go from 375 deer hunters to 350 deer managers and 25,000, deer hunters that shoot brown and this down kind of thing. I have a lot of pride in the fact that that's still going strong, that there's more and more people know what a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old is, green fields, and they're managing and they're doing this and they're letting things walk. And Arkansas is a pretty amazing deer hunting place. We may not kill the Boone and Crockett's that they have in Kentucky and Tennessee, but we still kill somewhere between 5 and 10 Boone and Crockett's on free range property a year. And there's, I don't know. I mean, I want to say millions, but it's not, but millions of 150-inch class deer. The things that we know now, as opposed to when I was young and coming up, are so much more impactful and more necessary. I mean, knowledge is power, and the more people that you can give that knowledge to, some of us are genetically predisposed, even if we're sitting in Little Rock on the outskirts of town on a little pond, but to learn more. Even if we're Tyrone in the middle of a gang war, we can, we got to figure out how to get that tentacle more emboldened and more ingrained into our society. So.
Well, I remember when that deer deal was going on in Arkansas, and I don't remember the name of the program manager, but I do recall I ran into him somewhere and asked how it was going, trying to get that accepted. And he said, if you think it's hard managing the 8 or 10 guys in your hunting club, try my 100 and whatever thousand or how many deer hunters you said. And he said, you don't get consensus.
Right, you don't. And the truth of the matter is a hunter, the biologists at the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission did not want to do this. If they were for it, we would have boom, boom. But what had happened was in the 80s, they had recommended shutting down deer dogs in the mountains. And they had, then they had recommended shooting more doe in the later on in the 80s, and the death threats, they were scared to change anything. But they also didn't believe in the management, and I get it. That's not a cure-all. But man, what happened was the guy started doing a 3-point rule on mandatory state, and they started seeing the impacts. And the next thing you know, he's got 8-point rule. I had presented to a lot of clubs and everything before it was mandatory. And there's a club in South Arkansas that you can't even hunt there unless you take a deer age class. And you can recognize the age class of a deer before you kill it. And they don't allow you to kill anything. Doesn't matter if it's got 3 points on one side, 4 points, or 15 points. 4-year-old or better before they'll let you shoot it. And they're killing 190-inch deer down there.
That's a big deer anyway.
When people say, well, you'll never grow big deer in Arkansas, I'm like, well, how do you know? Because you're killing that sucker. He got milk on his lips. Let him get a little age on it. So anyway, those were the fun times.
Howdy, listeners. For more great content, check out NWF Outdoors social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Connect with us. We want to hear from you. Send us your ideas for podcast guests and questions in the comments.
And for even more excellent content, here's a message from our partner podcast.
Hey everyone, this is Marsha Brownlee from Artemis Sportswomen. We know you love awesome stories about hunting, fishing, and conservation, so head on over to the Artemis Podcast. You'll meet adventurous, accomplished women who are redefining conservation through their lives in the field and on the water. Filled with humor, audacity, empathy, and intelligence, Artemis brings you new voices and introduces you to women from all walks of the sporting community. Find Artemis wherever you get your podcasts.
A minute ago, you were talking about salesmen and storytellers.
Yeah.
So, a man who I understand is one of the greatest salesmen of all time and one heck of a storyteller recently passed away, and he's a friend of yours. So, let's talk about Ray Scott, what he did, in creating bass, and also what that has meant to conservation and bass fishing in general.
Yeah, people you can't minimize the impact of that one man on hunting and fishing or this country. Someone mentioned that just the fishing industry in this country is a $4 billion industry, and I'm like, I think that's a little low, but it may not be. But the things that there's a lot of folks like me where it saved their life, right? So then now it's priceless. Can't put any more zeros on it. But he had that kind of impact. He created that industry out of what he would call a brainstorm and a rainstorm, sitting at Ross Barnett in a lodge somewhere in his underwear, watching a basketball game because he couldn't get out on the water. The storm coming through or whatever. And we need to be able to do that. He's learning more about basketball, watching it now. He's like, how do we teach more people about fishing and the tournament aspect of that is? There's nobody that could have pulled it off. There would be tournaments today, but they wouldn't have had the legitimacy that Ray Scott brought. They wouldn't have, the things that he did, and he understood the vision, the problem that, he pulled a lot of people along. And then he brought in guys like Bob Cobb, who was able to put those stories on paper and then television, because Ray Scott was a showman, and he knew how to make a joke. He's the only guy that could get away with riding into a bass fishing weigh-in on an elephant. He knew how to whip up a crowd, but he he could tell a story in a short, concise deal. But to really dig in, you needed the Bob Cobb guys. He understood the importance of putting the right people in place, and he did that. But Ray was. A lot of people say, well, he's doing it just to make money. Well, God bless him. Aren't we all? I'm sitting in this chair because they pay me. If I wasn't here, I'd be doing something. I was at the newspaper because they paid me. Now, I didn't make the money Ray Scott did and never will. But isn't that why we all are motivated at some point in time? And I'm glad that he made
Absolutely.
But he was also the guy that, and he filed 200 and something Clean Water Act lawsuits in one day. And so, I've had that conversation. I had that exchange with different. So it's like, well, back at 20 years ago. Oh, he's all about Ray Scott and all he's wanting to do is make some money. I said, how many lawsuits did you file last week on clean water? He may have appeared that way, and he didn't care. He really didn't that he appeared that way. But he knew what he was doing, and the catch and release mantra, that the same catch and release mantra that he started is that 3-point rule. If you're a deer hunter, you should understand that catch and release deal, because nobody caught and released you caught it, dude, you going to eat it. It's going in the grease, period. It wasn't all, let's throw it back. But he brought that up, which saved some of our fisheries, created managers instead of catchers, right? Instead of fishermen. But in order for him to do that, and a lot of people don't know this, but and you worked for Avery years ago. But Avery Wood, the first catch and release tournament was Ross Barnett, and Avery Wood didn't want them to release that fish. I mean, it's the idea that, okay, well, we've handled them, we've touched them and everything else, and you're going to put them back in the water, you're going to put diseases in our fishery. It wasn't like he was like, I'm just hungry for a bunch of fish. I mean, Avery felt like he was in the right place. Avery was a big man. All them Wood boys were big old boys.
Oh, yeah.
And but they were going to come and take the fish that were caught at that tournament. And Ray Scott and Bob Cobb stood in front of them with baseball bats in their hands and said, y'all ain't touching these fish. We're putting them back in. Now, the average person would say, if Ray's really all about that, then Ray would be like, okay, well, you're going to pay me $10 a fish, $5 a fish, or $1 a fish. But no, he's like, no, we're putting these fish back in. This is for our livelihood. He would fight. He would fight you. He would fight you. And the lawsuits the clean water lawsuits, the companies that he took on, the catch and release thing, and the issues that came out of all that, he would, people like that don't come along very often, Cook. You know that. I mean, that's the guy that you want on your side all the time. Now, there might be times you roll your eyes at him and go, oh, we should shut up. But, Ray Scott was the guy that you wanted to listen to. He's very charismatic. He was just a beautiful man. And a lot of people mischaracterized him in some ways. But he had an impact on our world. I mean, we got bass fishing in Italy, Spain, New Zealand, South Africa, Japan, China, because of Ray Scott. Canada.
Right.
Brandon Palaniuk's the hottest angler out there. And in Idaho, when he was born, there were no bass. I mean, It's making an impact, and we can't associate with anything but Ray Scott. And that's big. I'm rambling. Okay.
How that's translated into conservation, because you kind of started getting to it in the beginning, but you got to have the opportunity, and then you're doing it, and then you get to catch and release, and that lets more people do it, and it kind of cascades. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that translation for folks who they went from just a regular bass angler to now maybe they go clean water, how to habitat, all these things.
Well, in the same way that, the 3-point rule makes a deer hunter a deer manager, the catch and release made you a manager. It made you pay attention environmentally to the important, and the tournaments have done that. I mean, the smartest guys on aquatic vegetation in the country that do not have a degree are bass fishermen, but guys that are on the elite series, the guys that are fishing tournaments, the motivation for them to learn and be keyed in has been monetary. God bless them. If you make money doing that and learn and do all that, I mean, it's the perfect system. I mean, they're all very conservative, and I'm telling you, I mean, the elite series that I work for now, every event we go to, 10-20% of these guys will go and they'll stay later, or they'll go early, and they'll take part in lake cleanups. Lead the charge. Hey, let's clean up your lake. Let's get these shopping carts out of here, and these beer cans off the bank, and washing machines and crap like that has been thrown out there. And and there's no monetary value for them to do that, but now they are now ingrained in, hey, we need to take care of this. We need to do this, and you can see how most of them handle their catch, and they want to keep them alive. I mean, that's motivated by monetary, because if they get fined, or they lose money if they kill a fish, if their fish dies. The other part of that is okay, they're going to learn how to better take care of a fish. All these guys are experts at fizzing a fish caught deep. that is basically
Right.
suffering from the bends, and they know how to heal that fish really quick and let that fish back. And they do that all over the country, and they teach that all over the country. We focus on 5 big fish and the prize at the end of the day, 100 grand or 250,000, whatever that is. But the reality of it is that is a great motivator for them to create opportunities, and to teach and to be the conservationist like Aaron was talking about. We can't all be the little quiet lady. Even Walden made money off books. I mean, we started learning. I mean, we can't be poor and conservationist at the same time. I've tried that. I mean, you can, but at the end of the day, you're worried about other things rather than the resource, and so it's fine if a guy can make a buck on that. One thing that one thing about Ray Scott on all that too is a lot of people don't realize is, and I didn't really know this until this last week, so I don't know, I can't test to the veracity of it, but he, with his imperial whitetail clover, he was credited with starting the food plot craze. That all went on, and now every deer club's got a food plot.
Right.
People have them behind their homes and everything else. They may not be blowing imperial whitetail clover, but they all of a sudden understand that I can go out here in the woods and make an impact with my quail. I can have an impact with my turkeys, and then they want to do that. So, I mean, another little plug for Ray in there.
But you're around these pro anglers all the time. And I tell my wife, look, if you put their boat in here next to ours, they're going to outfish me every time, and it's going to be ugly. But for we weekend anglers watching these guys on television, what would be the number 1, 2, and 3 things you would really be watching and trying to pick up from them?
One of the things that you have to know, and you'll get to see it sparingly in the show, is their attention to detail. Whether that's how they tie a knot, how they're looking at the environment and saying, I need to be doing this, throwing this color, that color, or whatever. Knowing how the environmental changes hour to hour change what the fish are doing hour to hour and how they can intersect that. Just paying attention to, and we get, sometimes caught up on the weather too much, but the weather is the defining factor in so many of these things. The other is how the 2 speeds. There's 2 speeds of a bass angler: really fast or really slow. And when they're going really fast and when they're going really slow, there are times when you got to move, and there's times when you don't. And I was talking to some of the guys that at Lake Fort, Florida strain bass. They're slow biting fish. And, it's like this. I'm making a cast. It took me 2.5 minutes to make the cast and get it back in. Well, I mean that's a long time. So pay attention to the tempo of how they may approach some things. I wished I could tell you something about electronics, but I just stick my antenna in the water, and if it was on the 3rd deal, I knew I was deep enough, right? But I mean, they're really smart about those things. But I can tell a guy like a Greg Hackney, he can look at the weather, the water levels, how much rain, which is going to dictate the watercolor and all that, and anticipate what is going to happen next week, tomorrow, or an hour from now. And, knowing the seasonal patterns, that's a big thing. So at Lake Fort, they all knew that they were coming off the spawn. There might be a few fish that were still spawning, but they were going to be coming off the spawn, heading to summer staging areas, and then there would be some that would get hung up because right after the spawn in lakes in the south and southeast, we have a shad spawn, and that shad spawn will take place at night and carry over into the morning for an hour or two, and you can catch a good fish or whatever. So I mean, they understand every element within in that deal, and then they're looking for hard bottom. Hard bottom is maybe an environmental cause one of these days, because so many of our lakes are silting in, and the hard bottom is where he feeds, it's where he has sex, where he has babies. Hard bottoms, and different hard bottoms are important. I mean, there's a lot to that game.
Right.
And I've played a lot of sports, and we've got former professional baseball players, former professional hockey players, really good college athletes at football and basketball doing this game. I'll tell you, this is the hardest sport to play.
I've always been amazed how many of them were, whether high school standouts or college standouts, and
Right.
in different sports.
Right.
And
Lee Livesey played against Matthew Stafford growing up, So
that's pretty good competition.
right. I mean, they learn that it's not any different. If you really talk to Tom Brady and you see some of his stuff, he digs into the game so much so that he got caught with a pound light of a football, right?
Yep.
Just so you grip it a little bit. I mean, there's the fine lines of things are important to being successful outdoors. Doesn't matter if you're in a tournament, if you're trying to figure out how to kill a turkey, or if you're going to chase a whitetail. I mean, they learn that you control the variables that you can control, which if you're a deer hunter, that means I'm going to practice a little bit more with getting my arrow on target or getting my rifle sighted in. So when I do take that shot, that it's going to count, I'm going to have the confidence. I'm also going to pay attention to what the needs or whatever I'm chasing: bass, turkey, deer, waterfowl. I mean, you and I duck hunt a lot, and I love the fact that I'm around professional athletes, I'm around professional deer hunters, I'm around professional turkey hunters. But I'm going to tell you, duck hunters are the dumbest people on the face of the earth. They have no idea what drives a duck. And it's important because I'm going to tell you, Rex Hancock knew what a duck needed, which is why he fought that. But we've watered down that process, and that education is so important. If a guy understands what a duck needs, he's going to make sure that what a duck needs is protected, which is where we wind up fighting the battles. We want those duck hunters to know, hey, we got to have these trees. We got to have this degrading leaf matter so we can have the right kind of invertebrate production, or whatever that. I mean, everything comes in and at different places. They need more carbohydrates up here, more protein down here, and that kind of thing. But I'm going to tell you, the average duck hunter, at least in Arkansas, just doesn't even think. All they think is they need water. And
yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. Water and weather, and past that, they're not thinking much about it.
But so when you say, hey, we got to get water off Biomeda, we got to get water off the White River, save some of these oak trees and save some of this cover and save some of this stuff that is, because really, if you ask, most of us say, well, a duck needs, some rice and acorns. Well, hell, by the time a duck gets to Arkansas, the acorns are gone and the rice is gone. Period.
Yeah.
And they're here to build protein so they can have an eggshell when they get back to Canada. And then that's anyway.
You almost went there anyway. And a few minutes ago, you mentioned silt, and that made me think about Vanishing Paradise and the sediment in the marsh. You're involved in a lot of different conservation causes. You're supportive of a bunch of different things. Let's talk, as we wind this thing down, about some of your pet things in conservation that you're all in on.
Well, I'm all in on
that sportsmen need to know about.
Well, Vanishing Paradise is a big deal. I mean, yeah, it may be down there in Louisiana and then down there and this and that, and they don't, I don't like them. I don't even like crawfish or whatever. It don't matter. I mean, the whole country is was a living organism, the ground that we live on, and it's hard to tell a person that. I mean, I'm a very strong Christian, but God made this world to work. Man screws it up, and we can all agree on that. Everything that a man touches turns it into it. I'm talking about human man, but basically the Louisiana marsh. We understand if you called me tomorrow and said, "Man, I got prostate cancer, and I got colon cancer." Well, you didn't take care of your prostate. You didn't take care of your colon. Now you're gonna kill the whole body because your outgo is all messed up, and that's our outgo down there. And it is, you know, it's as simple as I can put it. It's a lot more complicated
Sure.
than that, but I mean, it is important, and it's screwed up not by Mother Nature. It's screwed up by man, by the channelizations, the core of destructions, and now the oyster industry and every other industry that wants, we'll play God for a couple of years and make this our own. But I mean, we need more freshwater diversions down there to keep that stuff alive. Katrina would have had much less of an impact on
Sure.
defenses. The defenses for them down there is the defenses for us in other ways. And that's important because the ducks that come through Arkansas that eventually go to Louisiana, they need to get what they need to come back through. And a duck in Arkansas, a lot of people don't understand that a duck in Arkansas can be in Louisiana, in just a few hours, and often
Right.
do. I mean, we radio tracked them from Bon Knob, Arkansas to mid Louisiana, pintails, back and forth every day. And they're getting something that they need in both places. And, those things are important.
You also mentioned a lot, talking about Arkansas bottomland hardwoods, and I know, that is a bone of contention there, and in Mississippi, and even in Tennessee. I mean, we've lost so many of our bottomland hardwoods, and let's talk real briefly about that, and we'll start moving towards the end.
Well, I mean,
here.
that's just a great example of the cycle of things. We lost all those hardwoods for one reason and mostly one reason: $10 soybean. And okay, well, I'm gonna make a lot of money doing this, and not thinking about the future. But they're gone. So now we're reverting in some ways, and then we have areas that we're so afraid that they're not going to get flooded that we artificially flood them too long and we kill them. There's a value in the types of trees that are there for waterfowl, for deer, for turkeys, and whatever, and they're not really water tolerant. God flooded this country, and that is known as Arkansas. I live in Little Rock. You got the Ozarks and the Washtaws, and then you got this delta, and it flooded naturally. And the flood of 1927. They decided they were going to not let that happen anymore. Lost a lot of lives and everything else, but Mother Nature's a rough sucker, and so now the reason it was flooded and God had that in its purpose was because there wasn't any rice. There was acres. There wasn't any rice, but all that grass, that native prairie grass, all the grass seed, all the stalks of habitat and different things that produce so much protein. And, hen would come down here and get what she needs. The most important element in all of that, which nobody sees, and you've never seen it, is the spiny-headed worm. I mean, I'm convinced that Star Wars took job of the hut and took the spines off of him, and that's a spiny-headed worm. But they shred all that stuff, which allows that stuff to regrow. The mallards feed on it. The spiny head attaches to her guts or his guts, and they poop it out, and it starts all the process over again. It's the most perfect deal if we'll leave it alone and do some of this as naturally as possible. Help it along where we can, but don't kill it because we want to kill something. Take advantage of it. Kill something when you can take advantage of it, but don't sell the farm because you just got to kill it, because you're only going to get a few years of that before it's, understand that all the pieces and parts. That's where I get caught up in the passion and the arguments and everything else, because if you're not digging into the sport you love, you don't really love it. You just love to get blood on your hands. And
I mean, we from the levees after 1927 to the dredging and everything else, and now holding water where we shouldn't for too long. It's man trying to control the environment to suit himself, and hey, we're all in some way probably a little bit guilty of at least. I like it the way I like it too, but it normally screws us up. But Steve, we're at the end of the hour, and in wrapping up, we normally ask for some words of wisdom. And do you have any final ones to close us out?
Just realize that a greater entity created all this than the Corps of Engineers, and
that might be the wisest words we've heard in a while.
He knows how to deal with this, so let's just manage along. Let's don't get in the way of what is supposed to happen. Let's manage along.
Manage along. I like that. How about you, Aaron?
Well, I'll just harken back a little to the beginning with what Steve was saying about helping less fortunate folks get opportunity, taking care of the places that do provide opportunity. Those are the core of the sportsman's ethos that I love so much, and the people that we love that do the conservation work, and that stuff's just critical. And sometimes we forget about it while we're all off on our adventures doing the things we love, but grabbing somebody who's less fortunate, helping them, and just doing things in general that help people, education, outreach, all those different things that make it possible for folks to be able to enjoy these things that are so amazing that we all get to enjoy, they're just such a great part of living. So I just appreciated that story, Steve, and I'll leave folks with that. Go get somebody outside who isn't normally allowed that opportunity.
Right.
Amen.
Well, and the shame part of it is when we start screwing with the environment, it's not the rich guys hunting clubs that are getting screwed with.
Yeah.
It's the places where the rest of us have to fight to get on. And, it always runs downhill, downstream, and, trying to make sure we're not at the bottom of it all the time. Yeah.
There you go. And I'll just say that for those out there listening who are privileged and fortunate enough to already be in this world hunting and fishing, make your voices heard, help other people get out there and enjoy it, but also make your voice heard to your representatives and anyone you can reach, whether it's about bottomland hardwoods or coastal Louisiana or steelhead and salmon in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, we need help all over this country. Thank you, fellas.
For more great content, check out NWF Outdoors social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Connect with us. We want to hear from you. Send us your ideas for podcast guests and questions in the comments.
We are NWF Outdoors.